Welcome back to the Football Fitness Federation podcast. This is episode 170. I'm delighted to welcome onto the podcast a guest that I've wanted to get on probably from the start of the podcast, Stu McMillan. Stu, how are you?
Yeah, not so bad. How are you?
I'm very good, thank you. And I've not mentioned your role because I'm sure many of the listeners probably know what you do currently, but CEO at ALTIS, sprint coach. And I'm sure, and I know actually, a lot of the listeners have been through the ALTIS programs. They've gone through some of the courses. So it'd be great to tap into some of the work that you guys are doing. Obviously, following on from the episode I did with Nick, when I can't even remember what that was, a few months ago. So quite a nice transition from that one. But yeah, I really appreciate you coming on. What I wanted to ask to start with was, I'm sure a lot of people, including myself, know what you do currently. Can you give us a little bit of background? We've just been speaking actually before we started recording about your time in England, but a little bit of background on yourself that led up to your role.
Yeah. First of all, thanks for having me on. I know I've been trying to do this for a while, so it's apologies for making you wait for so long. It's been a busy couple of years, I think, for everybody, right? So glad to be here finally. Yeah, I mean, it's been a long and windy road, as they say, right? I'm in my 50s now, so I've been doing this for a minute. I grew up in the UK. My dad was a coach. He was a pretty high level athlete, so I sort of grew up in a sporting family. He played football in Scotland, and he was also played for the county in badminton. So I started, grew up as a footballer and badminton and squash player. And then we moved to Canada when I was just about to turn 12. And again, he continued actually coaching over in Canada in football. I continued playing over there. He became the coaching coordinator of a local club and hired me as one of his coaches. So I actually started coaching football when I was 14. 38 years later, here I am still coaching. Some days I wonder why, but I'm still here, still doing it. And, thus my last few emails, if you've seen it, I know that's one of your questions that you want to get to a little bit later about purpose and why we are doing this. And I think, the longer you are doing it, the more you'll start to ask those questions of yourself. So it's, I'm looking forward to getting into that. But, from there, I have a typical story really of most coaches. I was a failed athlete. I couldn't make money doing it. I think I made $75 in my entire football career. So that's
better than some.
Not quite the return on investment that you would like, but I was an okay athlete, but not good enough to really continue on to the professional ranks. And I got into coaching. I was really interested in why people were good at what they were doing, first and foremost, not necessarily into the strength or power or speed yet, but just how people learn and how people get better at what they do. So that drove me into, really starting to look into things and into, whether it would be motor learning or how people get faster, how people, get stronger, how people get, can endure more work. And then while I was doing that, so at the end of my football career, actually, I was a pretty fast football player. Generally the fastest on the field. And I had a lot of friends who were sprinters. So when I stopped playing football, they said, well, you should come out and start sprinting with us. Because I was only 22 or 23 at the time, and I didn't feel like I wanted to stop playing sports. So I went out and started sprinting. And I found out really quickly that I was a very fast footballer, but not a fast sprinter. There's a very, very big difference, which has colored my thoughts to this day still. So I found out really quick that, a sprinting career wasn't going to be for me, but I got really interested in speed. And within about a year or two, I started coaching myself. I started coaching a group of other sprinters, having some success around that. And that sort of led into what I did for the next almost 20 years in Calgary in Canada. And I was just fortunate at the time that I was, in that time and place, the Canadian Sports Center was getting set up. There was a lot of really smart sports scientists around, a lot of really driven young coaches around that got pulled into that system. And I started working with them and spent the next 15 years, diving deep into speed, power, and strength. And then had the opportunity to move over to the UK in 2010 to work as part of the UK athletics setup leading into the London Olympics. Learned a ton there for 3 years, really enjoyed my time over there. Had a great group of athletes to work with, and a great group of coaches and other support staff to work with there. And that sort of led into a few different opportunities after the London Games. You know, as I had the opportunity to stay over there in the UK. I had an opportunity to go to Jamaica and work down there, a couple of opportunities in the US, an opportunity to go back to Canada, even an opportunity to go to Russia. Long story short, I found myself in Phoenix in the sun. I'd spent too long being cold and wet and miserable. And so I was just, I just wanted to be somewhere where it was warm and sunny. And, so I got to, involved in a startup that at the time was called the World Athletic Center. That was started by an ex-elite thrower named John Godina. And ALTIS was sort of born out of that. We rebranded as ALTIS in 2015. In 2017, myself and Kevin Tyler bought the company from John. And that's basically it, really. We started off as a bit of a track and field company that did some education on the side, because a lot of people outside of track and field saw the value in that. So we started, we've always sort of been educating other people, but that became the thing, the business, essentially. What started off as track and field company doing education almost became an education company that did some track and field. And that's kind of where we're at now. We're more of an education company that sort of matches where I am at my point in my career, where, 30 years in or over 30 years in, I'm trying to find ways now where I can share whatever knowledge I've got, whatever, information I have about how to navigate a coaching career with younger coaches. So that's what takes us up to the current day.
Brilliant. And you mentioned a little bit about your purpose on when you first started out working with athletes initially. Has that changed throughout your career? Like, what's your purpose, your why for going working with people now? Is that different to before?
Yeah, I mean, these are the questions I think that you have prior to going out and doing work, while you're doing work, and then looking back, right? So when I feel like when I was a young coach, we're all sort of motivated by very similar things. We just want to do what we like to do and what we're good at.
Yeah.
So let's figure out what I like to do. What I really liked to do back then was use my body and use my brain to do stuff. And I knew I wanted to work well, I went and actually did an art degree after I finished high school, because that's what I was really good at. I probably knew in the end of high school that I wasn't going to be a professional athlete of any sort, but I was a very good artist. So I went to art school, and a couple of years into art school, I figured that, this isn't for me. I'm not as interested in this as I am actually going out and being active. But at the time, I didn't really know that there wasn't much of an industry in sport performance. And I met a couple of people that were actually working in sport performance at the time. And I think a light bulb went off, and they said, maybe I can actually find a career in this. I can do coaching. And yeah, it's other parts of the world, coaching was a career. In Canada in 1991, it really didn't exist at all. We sort of built it. So I found that, yes, there's a potential here for me to do something that I like and make a career out of it. And then I just started doing that, right? So my purpose initially was just doing things I like to do and trying to figure out a way to make money doing it.
Yeah.
That was it, and then after that, once I got into a job where I didn't have to worry about a paycheck every 2 weeks, then it became a little bit more about, all right, how do I get better at this? What do I need to do? How do I educate myself so I can learn how to be the best that I can possibly be in this, which is at the time about me being as good a possible coach as I could be. What did that mean? And where did I need to go with my studies to figure out how to do that? That over time, when I got more and more comfortable with sort of what I understood about coaching, it became probably more important for me that the athletes that I was coaching, I was impacting them in a positive way. So it became less about me and a little bit more about the 10 or 15 or 20 or 30 or however many athletes that I was working with at the time, and how they were doing and how I was impacting their lives, how I was impacting their performance. And that became sort of my motivation over the middle of my career. It was all about, all right, how can I put myself in a position where I can impact these athletes' careers as much as I possibly can?
Mm-hmm.
And I think that, it's, that's, we always have different reasons. It's dynamical and it's complex, right? It's not like I had one reason. That's my reason for being. That's the reason I got up in the morning, was just for this. There's a bunch of other things that come along with that. That's probably, though, at that time of my career, like through the middle of my career, was the driver. Like, that was the main reason. It was how can I affect athlete performance? I'm not sure if that's the case anymore, to be honest. Like, that's really important to me still. I still coach a group of 15 athletes in total, a few remote, a few here in Atlanta. And it's really important to me that they do really well, that I can impact their lives in a positive way, meaning I can impact their performance in a positive way, that whatever their goals are, I can help them reach those goals. But on top of that, and almost at this part of my career, kind of superseding that, is how can I give back to the community of coaches worldwide? Because that's sort of where I'm at in my career now, right? You're 30 years in, and you kind of, you look for different reasons to do what you're doing. That's not static. So it's now is how can I be the best coach educator I can be? What does that look like? How can I communicate better to the community of coaches around the world, and what type of coaches, and how I can communicate to them? So it's, but that's like I said, that's still not just about that. It's still important for me to be as knowledgeable a coach as I can possibly be. So I'm still selfish with that. I still research, and I still study, and I still read, and I still try to work out how I can be a better coach. I still try to be the best coach I can be for the athletes that I'm working with. So I'm still trying to impact their lives and their performances in as a greater way as I can. And I'm trying to figure out in this new role with ALTIS now, especially over the last sort of 5 years, of how we can better educate younger coaches, how we can use our experiences to help them navigate their own coaching journeys.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that, because I think that's really good to hear the transition of your, I don't know, it's probably a little bit cliche saying your why or your purpose, but that's essentially what we're discussing, isn't it? The reason that you're going, and the impact you want to make. And it is really interesting. I fully agree that changes, doesn't it? Or there are a number of reasons. There's not just that single one, and that can transition through a career as well. I'll pick you up on something, because I think it's interesting, something we spoke about before. You spoke about working with athletes, and every time you mentioned about working with an athlete, you mentioned lives before performance, affecting their life before their performance. Can we go into that? Like, because for me, that's a huge part of the coach's role, isn't it?
Yeah, I'm not sure.
No?
Yeah, I'm not sure that it is. I
No?
think with some coaches, some of the time, life supersedes performance. But I think for too many coaches, too many of the time, that they take that as a heuristic, and then it's all the time. That my job as a coach is to impact this young person's or this older person's life. And it's not about performance. Remember, but in most instances, with most coaches, they don't have that skill set.
Yeah.
They have the skill set as a performance coach or a health coach or a health and performance coach, but they don't necessarily have the skill set as being a life coach. And we there's these cliches, right? We coach the person and not the athlete. And yeah, I do agree with that. But our jobs, if you really, really narrow into this, our job is to impact their performance. In most cases, it's not their life. It's not to help them out with their life, right? But I feel like with me now at this point in my career, I understand the bigger picture maybe a little bit better than I did when I was 5 years in, or 10 years in, or 15 years in. I think when you're starting out, when you're a younger coach, you're 5 years into your career, your job is to get the athlete in front of you better at what they're doing. That's it.
Yeah.
Don't conflate that. You're not a life coach. You're not to help them out with their life. They've got parents for that. They've got other people in their lives for that. Your job is to, if you're a sprint coach, your job is to get them better at sprinting. If you're a football coach, it's to get them better at football. Now, once you develop those relationships over time, you can impact their lives in a positive way. And now, obviously, there's a massive crossover, right? there, right? With most of the athletes that we work with, that Venn diagram of life and performance, there's a massive crossover, and we can debate the healthiness of how much of a crossover is good and how much of it is, we need to separate that. But the reality is, most of the best athletes that I've ever worked with, and probably most of the best athletes that anyone's ever worked with, have a very large crossover between their life and their athletic career, right? So there's a little separation between the two. So indirectly, we're impacting both regardless. And I think it's important to understand that it's just not, that's not our primary role. Our primary role as a strength and conditioning coach, or a fitness coach, or a tactical coach, whatever role that you have on the coaching team, is to impact their performance. And ideally, and hopefully, if you're doing it in an ethical and a positive way, then you're also impacting their life. But it's important, I think, that we think about it in that order: performance and then life, not life and then performance, even though I did say life and then performance. But I feel like, as I said, it's I think that maybe comes with experience.
Yeah, I was just about to say I should have probably been a bit more specific on that, because I think, like you mentioned, a life coach, and you see the cliche of like a 19, 20-year-old life coach that's not had much of their life yet. Like, I'm not sure how you can coach someone when you're that young. But I just thought to get your opinion. But when you've worked with someone for many years, it's not just solely going to be your relationship is about the performance, because you're going to get to know that person pretty well, aren't you? I'm sure you've got athletes yourself that you know a lot about them, and you've had a big impact on them away from the track or away from performance as well as on.
Yeah, and it's I'll pull myself up on a little bit on what I said. So it's if you're a 22-year-old coach, as I was in 1991, and you're working with 14-year-old kids, you're probably not only motivated by how the kid moves or how the kid runs or how the kid plays football. You want to do it in a way that, as I said, is impacting how they go about responding to authority, responding to coaching. So there's a way to do it still, right? It's what I'm saying is not, it's an indirect effect on their life through coaching. Coaches can have a very impactful and positive effect on how young people go through their lives. For sure they can. And I think it's really important that the coaches that are working with 14, 15, 16-year-olds are educated in a way in which they do have a positive impact, because we can also, there's the opposite of that. Coaches can have a very negative impact on how young athletes go through their lives, as we're seeing more and more over the course of the last few years with some of the high-profile cases that are coming up. So I don't want people to get confused in what I said there, that it's only about performance. To just understand that there's probably a way in which we can act as coaches and affect the lives of these athletes through how we're coaching them for their sport. But there's a link there, and I'm not sure that I totally fully communicated what that means earlier. So it's, yes, to get to your question, we get to know these kids really, really well over the course of time. I spend at this time in my life 20 to 25 hours a week with the kids that I'm coaching. So that can be, you get to know them really well pretty quickly. And if you're coaching somebody for 6, 8, 10, 12 years, I've been coaching one athlete for 14 years now. I know her as, we're like family at this point.
Yeah.
I really value that. And I value those relationships, and I value the impact that not only that I can potentially have on their lives, but that the athletes have on my life.
Yeah, definitely. No, and I think I fully agree. And if you relate that to football, coaches working in academies, that ties in with what you were talking about. You're providing a experience for them that they're going to carry on into hopefully their professional life, whether it is football or whatever else they continue to go on to do. Whereas first team is probably going to be more about performance, isn't it? Because first team is about performance. So no, I think that was great, but I appreciate what you're getting at with that, and I fully agree. We couldn't get you on without diving into some speed development work. And the first thing I was going to ask is, when you have come in in interactions, conversations with coaches in team sports, particularly football, what are some of the most common questions that get put to you?
It used to be, how do we get our players faster? Because I think that was my role at the time. I was a coach that was known to be able to get athletes faster. So you know, most things start with a problem. So if you're a fitness coach or a strength and conditioning coach for a team sport, and you want to get your athletes faster, and you don't have the requisite expertise to understand how to do that, that's your problem. And you look for people that can do that. So I would come in and help those coaches help the athletes to get faster. At this point in my career, it's slightly different. I can speak to, you know, a greater magnitude of problems, I think, you know, whether it's healthier, whether it's better mechanics, whether it's the integration of health and performance, whether it's system building, whatever. But still, even that being said, most of the time that most coaches come to us, whether it's us as ALTIS or me as just a coach, it's about improving the speed of the players. But it's more than that. It's improving the speed of the players to play the game faster, not necessarily just to get faster. Where I think that's where the industry's come now, and we have a better understanding of that difference. 20 years ago, 15 years ago, there was an assumption, and in some people, and sometimes in some spaces, it's still the same. There was an assumption that just by an athlete or a player getting faster, that meant necessarily that they would play the game faster. And we know that's not the case anymore. So where I feel like a lot of coaches struggle, whether they're fitness coaches, strength and conditioning coaches, whatever, is understanding. And they know now that, all right, if I'm going to be working on getting my players faster, my teams faster, that means playing the game faster. That doesn't necessarily mean they have a faster 20 meters or have a faster 30 meters. How do I get them playing faster? And that's the struggle now. That's what we're working on now. That's all of the work that we've been doing over the course of probably the last 4 or 5 years, is understanding that better, what that means, what those questions are, how we can impact not necessarily just their speed, but how they play the game. Because if you're impacting their speed away from the game, but you're not impacting how they play the game, then you've just wasted that athlete's time and you've wasted the coach's time. You have to impact the way they play the game. If you're not, it's what are you doing there? So that's what we continue to work with now. That's probably consistently what most coaches now are looking for. They understand that there's a difference between running outside of the game in an isolated way and running and being faster within the confines of the game, and how those two differ and how they can impact the latter.
And when you said before, Stu, about yourself, when you were a fast footballer, but then you went onto the track and you realized that you weren't up to standard of those guys, was it that the sprinters were so much quicker, or do you think it was like you had the sort of game insight and you were able to use your speed well on the pitch?
Yeah, I mean, that's an interesting question. No, they were way faster. Yeah, they were way faster. But I got an interesting story. So I stopped playing, at a high level when I was 22 or 23, and got into sprinting. And I went into sprinting without much of an understanding of what sprinting meant. I didn't really know anything about sprint mechanics. I didn't know anything about sprint training. I didn't know I didn't think about sprinting and what my mechanics should be when I was a footballer. I just ran. And then I learned all this stuff: mechanics, force production, direction of force production, all this stuff that was involved in becoming faster. I learned over the course of the next 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 years. And I actually went back and played men's league football a few years later. So maybe if I stopped playing at a high level when I was 22 or 23, I think I went back and started playing again when I was 28 or 29. And I felt like, and I'm not certain whether I'm just biased, looking back and hindsight bias here. I felt like I was a much faster footballer from understanding more about mechanics and having to demonstrate a lot of these things by, through my time through that period of being a sprint coach or a speed coach for other players. I felt like that impacted my ability to play the game in a positive way, where I knew now that I was faster than the players I was playing against. So I was able to almost manipulate the way I played the game to become a better player. So that's when I started thinking back, okay, if I knew this stuff when I was 19 or 18 or 20 and understood how to maximize my sprint ability, would I have been a better player? Would I have been even faster? And then I could use that, action capability to impact my performance better than I could have when I didn't know that stuff, right? So knowledge of rather than just knowledge in. Excuse me. So that's when I started really thinking about this. It's the separation and sometimes the confluence between working in the content of a movement and the context of the movement, working with, on an action capability outside the context of the game and working with that ability within the confines of the game. So that's when I really started thinking about it. And I've totally forgot your question.
I was just asking about yourself, like around the sort of game insight and going back into that. Like, was it the fact that I think we went right back to, were the guys just really quick, or was it the game insight that led to you being so quick on the pitch?
Yeah, and that's right. That's so what I came away with there is, and this was, I was a young guy and I didn't really know anything, so that's my caveat. But I still felt at that time that yes, if I could be faster outside of the game, that's going to make me a faster player in the game. That was the assumption that I had at the time, and I think that's the assumption that the industry had at the time. That if you're stronger, you'd be better at playing the game if it involved any sort of strength ability. If you're faster, then you'll be better at playing the game if it had anything to do with being fast or speed. And that's what kind of where we started. But I had the insight, as you said, I started asking those questions because, yeah, that's my assumption, but I'm really, is this really necessarily true? And that sort of started this 15 or 20-year journey from then to better understand the assumptions that we make and better understand this word of transfer or relatedness of, the stuff we do and the work that we do outside of the game. How does that relate to how athletes and players play the game? And that's everything about, all of our, probably all the people that are listening to this, that's what they're most interested in, right? If you're not impacting how they play the game with the work that you do, then you're wasting your time and theirs. So it's, I had the, as I said, most of the people that are listening will have very similar experiences, right? And most of them play the game, whatever game that is, they'll have played that if they're working in it now. So we have those questions, and sometimes, all the times we're biased toward, back towards our own experiences. And, my initial experiences was I was fast, and that's one of the reasons why I was good. And that's what sort of got me into it. Right. But then I started quickly understanding that there's not a one-to-one relationship there, that just because I get faster doesn't necessarily mean that I'm a better player. And as I said, that's been the journey ever since.
Yeah, no, it's really interesting, isn't it? Because I'm sure a lot of the listeners are thinking now about specific cases in their team of, oh, we've got X player who's really quick, and I wonder if I did more work with this player or even that player, like what sort of impact could I make with them? And I know there was some work by, I think Paul Colbeck did some breakdown of when Usain Bolt went into football, and when he was playing, and he did some comparisons between Usain Bolt and I can't think of the player he did, but a Premier League player, and sort of how the insight came into it. It wasn't just about the speeds that the players were hitting. It was more about reacting, preempting like situations in the game that really had the impact, and they were the impactful times in a game. It wasn't just solely about how fast they could run.
Yeah, it's, his research is really interesting, right? And much of the research that's come out over the last sort of decade has been really interesting, and it's given us better insight into where speed is important, how speed is important. We didn't have that 20 years ago. You just like I said, we just made those assumptions that, yeah, if I'm faster, I'll play the game better because I can beat this player. And, like, as I said, most of us have our own experiences that speak to that, right? I remember quite vividly that because I was faster, I could just knock the ball back past the fullback and run by him. And that impacted the way I played the game. And we can just say, okay, if I get this player faster, and he can do that as well. But I feel like, and I feel to a degree that's still true, right? And I think that's what Paul's, much of his research showed, right? Yeah, speed is important. It's important in these impactful moments in games. It's not important all the time, but there might be one or two, plays during a game where that, because the player's peak speed is faster, they're able to get to the ball quicker and produce a game defining moment. So it still is really important that just that linear speed is still seemingly super important. It's just, how does that now interact with all of the other stuff that's involved in the game? That's what everybody's just still trying to figure out.
And with that in mind, if we're talking about being efficient with the time that we have with our players, and I'll reference the podcast I did with Nick, because we spoke about part-time programs, semi-professional programs that a lot of coaches are working on, that on limited time, they might only be having, 30 minutes a session, if that, maybe 20 minutes a session, and they want to put some work into their players. If we've got that in mind, how, or from your point of view, how can we be efficient with that time? Where should we focus our energy with everything that we've just spoke about in mind?
Yeah, that's very, very contextual, dependent entirely upon who you're working with, where they are in their career, how much time you have to work with them. The way in which I sort of organize that in my own brain is, if we look at the skill as the skill of running fast as you play football as the ultimate objective of a coach that's interested in impacting speed of the football player, as it is, right? The skill of actually playing the game faster is our ultimate objective there when we're working on quote unquote speed work, and work back from there. So if skill is the application of the sport-specific technique in context, and we need to understand it's in context.
Yeah,
has to be in context, and work back. If you've got then if you're working with a professional football team, and most of your players are, let's say they're an average age of 27, and you're seeing them for 15 minutes 4 times a week, so you've got about an hour of work with them per week, then you're going to spend most of your time trying to impact the skill. Because if you're any generation away from that skill, you're having it's less related to how they play the game. So you're trying then to devise ways in which you can impact how they play the game directly, because you don't have the time to build all these other things that lead up to that. And they're also in a part of their development where their capacity, their ability, their potential is kind of maximized, right? They're at the rate of diminishing returns on all of those things. But what they're not at is the actual skill of sprinting in the game. So it's the way in which I organize this sort of like I said, in my brain, is if you start with an athlete's potential, right? That's with something that's capable of coming into being or being developed, right? So if you think about what that means from a player playing the game fast, do they actually have the potential to do that? What is their morphology? What is their genetics? What is their, fiber type and that sort of thing? Can you affect the potential? Would you spend much time trying to affect the potential of a professional player that you're working with for an hour a week? Probably not, right? Probably not, because you may be able to affect it, but it's probably so many generations away from the skill of playing in the game that you're not really going to affect how they're performing. But if you've got a 14-year-old kid that's nowhere near maximize their potential in anything that they're doing, then by doing this general work in trying to affect the potential, maybe you're just working on motor unit recruitment, for example. Maybe you're just doing isometric mid-thigh pulls, right? Maybe by increasing their ability to do a isometric mid-thigh pull, that you're increasing their potential to the point where they can actually apply more force, they can move better, their technique looks better, and they can actually be more skillful in the game just by increasing or improving their potential. That's not the case with a professional, right? Further down or further closer now to the skill is the capacity, right? So the physical manifestation of the potential. So if we take, say, the mid-thigh pull as, as our measurement of a player's potential, the measurement of an athlete's capacity, the manifestation of that potential, it could be, say, a deadlift or a squat or an Olympic lift. So it's a little bit closer. It's a generation closer to the skill, but it's still nowhere near it. But if you've got a 16-year-old player, by improving the player's capacity, their ability to produce work, their capacity of their maximal amount of energy or work, then you're probably going to have a pretty direct effect on how they play the game without doing anything around the skill or the technique or their ability. You're just getting stronger, and they'll probably get faster, and they'll probably play the game faster. But again, if you're doing that with a 27-year-old professional player that you see 4 days a week, 15 to 30 minutes at a time, by doing that work, is it going to have a direct effect on how fast they are? Probably not. There's other reasons why you may want to do that, but it's not going to be a direct connection to how fast they play the game. Now, closer to the skill again, so you've got the potential, something that's capable of coming into being. You've got the capacity, which is the maximal amount of work or the physical manifestation of the potential. Next is the ability. It's the expression of the capacity in a sport-specific manner. So now, as it said, maybe it relates to, sprinting in a game, the physical manifestation of this, or the expression of the capacity in a sport-specific way, might be a resisted acceleration. So now, can you use that increased strength capacity that you've developed in the weight room in a more sport-specific way, say resisted accels? And this is a lot of the work that JB Moran and his group are doing, right? Is in that ability realm. And there's also the next realm down that I'll talk about in a second, is basically, expressing that capacity in a sport-specific way. So now it's closer to the skill in context, which is playing the game faster. And now we start talking about the type of work that we can do with professional players that may actually impact the way they play the game in context. So now if somebody has the ability to do a resisted acceleration better, that improves over the course of time, there's a possibility there that might have a direct effect with how they play the game, depending upon where they're coming into it from, right? If they have no clue how to express force, no clue how to accelerate and use whatever strength capacity that they have, by working on this ability, you actually might improve their acceleration ability, right? So, and then again, closer now to the game is bringing it a little bit more contextual. So the technique, it's the application of that sport-specific ability, but without context. So now we may work, take snippets out of the game and actually accelerate, get a ball involved, get a couple players involved. And now actually, can you accelerate better? Can you apply that sport-specific ability with a little bit more context, but still outside of the full context of the game? That's what we talk about when, the type of work that we're doing in warm-ups, because I feel like in most cases with most coaches, they're not going to be able to directly affect skill in the game. You've got to have some significantly impressive buy-in from your technical and tactical coaches and head coaches to be able to have that influence, that level of influence. But what we can do is we can work on the technique. So most of the time that we have as fitness coaches, strength and conditioning coaches with team sport players or in warm-ups, as we know, right? So we can most coaches now, most technical tactical coaches and head coaches will allow some use of the ball in some of these instances, or most of these instances. Most of the coaches will also allow, players to play together and move together, so we can have some impact now in a slightly decontextualized way, but still not directly to the skill in the game, which means, with all the information in the environment, in the full ecosystem that's involved in playing. So I think that's where our greatest impact is. We talk about leverage points, right? If you're trying to impact speed of play for each player, what is the most appropriate leverage point within that entire system? So at one end of that continuum, you've got skill, which is the application of speed in the game, in the full game, with all the information in the ecosystem that we're playing it within. At the other end of that spectrum, you've got the potential, something that's capable of coming into being, right? And all the way across that, where is the most appropriate leverage point for me as a coach to work on the players that are in front of me at that time? So as I said, for the professional player, it's probably right at technique, right? It's not the full skill. I'm not going to be out there with the technical, tactical, and the head coaches running a practice and stopping the practice and talking to them about how they're sprinting. That doesn't exist. But what does exist is that time where I have with the players prior or afterwards, or while players are rehabbing, whatever. That's where I can get involved and actually impact how players play the game. Now, with a 14-year-old, it could be very different. Or no, it's not could be, it's very different. Yeah. I can impact how they play a game using very general means, meaning I get them stronger. I work on their ability to express that strength. I work on their technique, their sport-specific ability. And that's where I'll probably spend most of my time as a coach of 14 to 17-year-olds, is getting them stronger, teaching them how to technique and how to express that strength in sport-specific ways. That make any sense?
It's brilliant.
Ramble. I apologize, but that's
no, it was superb. And it ties really nicely. I did a podcast with Jonas quite a while ago now, and he spoke about some very similar sort of thought processes. And I think the skill of that, Stu, also comes down to when you've got a squad in front of you of however many players, you're going to have players sort of scattered along that spectrum as well, though, aren't you? Because you are going to have some of the professional players that are just going to be focusing on the game side of things. But there are going to be players with maybe less of a S&C background, a strength background, that maybe need the foundation work that we're talking about academy players having. And I know that is changing now with football, like generally, because there are more programs being put in play from an early age, but also professional level. But how would you go about that? Because if we were talking about having players throughout that spectrum, and we're trying to go, right, we want to impact here, but then these players still need this. Is it a case of just splitting them off? Like, what would your approach be to that?
Yeah, I mean, that's the job, isn't it?
Yeah.
We work with individual players on a team, and we've got to, our job is literally understanding what each individual needs as it relates to playing the game. Now, what I've found, and I do this even with my professionals and always have, whether it's working with professional track and field athletes or professional footballers or American football players or whatever, is you can mailbox players into where their most appropriate leverage point is. So figure out what the leverage points are there where you can affect a majority of the team. And you might have, okay, these 4 players here, this leverage point is going to be, I'm just going to try to get them stronger, because they don't even apply anywhere near the amount of force that's required. I can spend time on getting them more technically efficient, but they're just weak as hell. So it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter how technical they are. So these guys are going to get strong. So we're going to design, practices that's going to be trying to affect that. This group here, they're pretty strong. They can apply force pretty well, but the technique sucks. So we're going to spend a little bit more time on the technique of these players. These players over here, their technique is excellent, and they're strong, and they're really quite good. So we're going to, involve a lot more information, a lot more complexity, put a lot more, put them in the ecosystem that they might be, playing the game at. And that's probably the 3 groups, right? You've got the ones that are just weak. We're just going to get them stronger. You've got the ones that are strong enough that just don't have, that have poor technique, and you have the ones that are strong enough and have pretty good technique, and we can involve a little bit more information. So that's probably the way I would do it with almost every single group at every level. Includes professional levels, right? You've got professional players, especially in football, that are very, very weak.
Yeah.
That you may be able to affect their sprint ability just by getting them a bit stronger. You know, that's easier said than done, obviously, because you got to, you know, get buy-in. You have to find the time to do that, and so on and so forth. But you know, it's not many of those players in football. It's more than, say, it is in professional American football, because a prerequisite for being an American football player is to being strong.
Yeah.
So you'll find nobody that's weak.
Yeah.
So you're generally working on the technique and skill end with American football players, but with you know, English football players, there's a lot of even professionals who are super weak that you can impact how they play just by getting them a little bit stronger, working on the ability now to accelerate better or to sprint better, and you know, it's that might be your leverage point. But I feel like with most people, most of the time, with the constraints that exist in professional sport, it's challenging. We want to do all of these things, but the constraints don't allow us to do it oftentimes, right? So we have to try to figure out what is the best use of my time with this, say, hour a week that I have with these players. And where I start with most of the professional coaching teams that I work with is in two instances. It's, for example, I work with we were based in Arizona for almost 9 years. And anyone who's over here in America knows that baseball, have half of your teams are based in Arizona and half of the teams are based in Florida. Now they obviously play all over North America, but their bases, half of them are in Phoenix or the Phoenix area, and half of them are in the Florida area. So because we were in Phoenix, we worked with a lot of baseball teams and a lot of baseball coaches. So the first thing that I would do when any of these baseball coaches or baseball teams contacted us was go out to practice and watch them coach. And in 9 instances out of 10, the coaching impact was limited to what happened in the weight room. And what happened out on the field was, and it's a little bit different in baseball than it is in football. I understand that, but it's not as different, I don't think, as what many people think. What happened on the field was a coach would read off a list of warm-up exercises for the players to do. The players would go through that warm-up exercise, or skip, run over here, shuffle over there, karaoke here, do some stretches, blah, blah, blah. And there's very little qualitative work being done there. There's very little intention of any of the coaches. Most of the coaches are not even paying really that much attention at all, right? There's a lot of coaches are just standing by the side with a coffee in their hand and reading off a list, or memorizing a list and just reading it off. And if the coach isn't intentional with the work that they're doing or paying attention to how the athletes are moving, then how do we expect the athletes to pay attention and be intentional with how they are moving? Now, I know a lot of that is tradition, and it's really difficult. You'll have a lot of players that don't listen to you. You don't want to listen to you, especially at the professional levels, right? But our job is to try to impact all the players as much as we can. So right from the start, we know we're probably not going to impact a third of them. A third of them are just they're not going to care. Yeah. But that gives us still 2/3 of the players that we can impact how they play the game. And that requires us to be intentional and paying attention consistently over and over and over and over again. And only when we're consistent with that will we start to see it being bought in by the players. So if we start being really intentional with how we are playing, how we are guiding athletes through warm-ups, for example, how they're skipping, how they're shuffling, how they're sprinting back in between drills, whatever that is, you can start building this sort of circle of communication with the athlete, where the athlete starts to understand what is important. And because you are taking it, consistently, intentionally, and at attention every single day, they'll start to buy in over the course of time. So for me, the very first step, getting around back to your question, was getting the coaches to actually pay attention. and being intentional with what they're doing, not just in the weight room.
Yeah.
Right. Because most of us do both. Most of us are the fitness coach out on the field, but also the strength and conditioning coach in the weight room. And most of the coaches in this realm are like this when it comes to the work in the weight room. They're very, very picky with how the athletes are moving, how the players are moving. But when they're out in the field, it's just whatever happens. I'm just there to read off a list, and you go through the exercises, you go through the quote unquote drills. And because I've taken you through these exercises or these drills, the athletes will be better movers or better players or better sprinters or whatever. And we know that that's obviously not the case. Better coaches are intentional about everything that they do, how the players move all of the time. And I think we can impact how players play the game, not just how fast they are, but how fast they are is a indirect from this, just by being more demanding about how players move all the time. So how they jog around the field. If you have your players jog around the field a couple laps, how do they jog? How do they do that? How they skip. What are they thinking about when they skip? Are they thinking about their feet at all? Are they thinking about their arms? Are they trying to pay attention to their pelvic position? Are they trying to pay attention to how their shoulders are moving? Are you having these conversations with the players over and over and over again? And only when you build that relationship where you as a coach have the same intention and attention as the players, then we can start impacting how the players move and how healthy they are and how they perform.
That is brilliant. And it's probably a little sad hobby of mine that when I go and watch football matches, I always want to get there early and watch warm-ups.
Yeah, me
But
too.
you see it, don't you? You've just mentioned probably however many % of the team that don't show that intent. And you see it in a warm-up. When players are in a line, they're going through the stretches. Basically, there's no point in doing them. They may as well be playing with a ball. They're probably going to do more expansive movements with a ball, aren't they? But I fully agree. I think that intent has to come from the coaches. I do think that like you said, there are a group of players, and I spoke to Connor Washington, who plays for Northern Ireland not long ago, and he was saying the same. He said, you're going to have that group of players that aren't going to do it. They're not going to buy into it, but then you have to impact the ones that will. And I fully agree that intent in warm-ups, like it has to be led by the coach, doesn't it? And you see the difference. It's glaringly obvious, isn't it, when you start watching warm-ups?
Yeah, it's hard, right? And this is why many coaches stop. The consistency is challenging because most of the players haven't really been, coaches haven't demanded this intention from them before. So if you start working with 20-year-old players, let's say you go into the championship and you've got a job as a fitness coach for a championship team. Most of the players haven't been demanded this level of intention about what they're doing. And now you're demanding it and you're getting pushback and you're getting, people don't really know what you're saying or understand how you're saying it. And you're not really seeing the impact. And what are most coaches going to do? They're kind of going to give up. It's challenging, right? When you've got new players trying to learn new skills and it's taking time, there's a struggle there that many of the players aren't really willing to go through, but also many of the coaches are not willing to go through. But that's what coaching is. You don't give up when you're trying to teach a player how to squat or how to do a rear foot elevated split squat or how to do a clean. The job of coaching is to do that, is to teach them how to do it. That's the entire job. Now, some of them, as you know, aren't going to be interested. That's okay. But you know what? They're not, many of them are not interested because they've seen guys like you, girls like you come in before. You guys are a dime a dozen to them. And they just know that, a year later, they're going to be out and somebody will come in with a new set of ideas and whatever. I'm at this point in my career now doing what I do, and I'm going to continue doing what I do. But if you're consistent with it every single day and you're demanding intention from the athletes, every single one of them all the time, then even those ones that aren't really that engaged to begin with, they're going to eventually start, moving your way. They do. I've seen it over and over again. So it's just, I feel like we all kind of have that. We understand it's important, and we go into each of those situations and scenarios, environments, understanding that and with the best intentions. But it's a lot harder than I feel like many think, and many coaches give up early.
Yeah.
Where it's the whole job is that. That's your job. Your job isn't to read up a list of exercises, have them go through it, make it look pretty, and then, okay, that's it. They're warm. Over to you guys. Your job is to impact how they play the game. And if your only opportunity to do that is 15 minutes a day on the warm-ups, that's your time. How do I do it now? Well, you can impact how they play a game by making sure that they move better. And if they move better, they're going to perform better and they'll be healthier. That's your time. So really, make the most of it. Design your warm-ups to try to make the most of it rather than just copying everybody else. These warm-ups now that you see, is everybody's doing the same thing in the same way. There's no intention. Players aren't paying attention. Coaches aren't really paying attention. It's doing nothing, as you said, in most cases.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it's a great point. And I also think you've got to understand, because it's easy to look from the outside, isn't it? And look at a team and be like, well, they're not doing it, and not knowing that the coach is changing the culture at the club, and they are making progress, but it's not happening yet. So it's very easy to look from the outside. I get that. But no, it's really interesting. I think the point on intent and pushing that with players, and essentially it comes down to your standards, doesn't it? If you're keeping your standards at a certain level, day in, day out, session in, session out, they know where you're at. Whereas if you let them drop at any point, players are going to slip back into where they were before, haven't they? Because it's just natural to them.
Yeah, 100%. It's we talk about, this is one of the things that we get pushback from a lot of American football coaches is there's a difference between, speed and game speed, right? You guys don't understand speed in the game. And this stuff isn't important because that's not game speed, because they play the game with a ball and they got pads on, they've got all this other stuff. And that's fair enough, right? That's a really good argument.
Yeah.
And many don't. Many coaches, frankly, don't understand, and they have still this assumption that just because I get them faster outside of the game, they're going to be necessarily faster inside the game. Now, that isn't obviously, it's not entirely true for many athletes. But what I believe is not controversial. If players are moving better, they're generally going to be performing better, and they're generally going to be healthier. So our first goal is, how do I affect a player's movement? Don't forget about speed, forget about running mechanics, acceleration mechanics, forget about all that. How do I just try to affect how these players move? Because there is a direct link between the quality of movement and the quantity, on the ability to express whatever it is they're trying to express, and their health. It's direct. And I think research is starting to catch up to this now. It's still not quite there, but some of the work that Mendegucci is doing and his group obviously are really helping with this. And I think it's probably going to be another couple of decades before the scientific, at least the sports science community, truly understand this link. But coaches, at least smart coaches, have understood that there's a very strong link there for many, many years. Right. So it's don't be dismayed by the lack of sports science support for this. Some things are just logical.
Yeah.
If you move better, you're probably going to perform better and you'll probably be healthy. Now there's a whole argument around what is better and what is correct and what's most effective, efficient, and all that. And that's a rabbit hole that you can spend, weeks going down. But it's, that's as I said, that's our jobs. Is to just get them performing better, work back from that. What does that mean? If we get them moving better, more effectively, more efficiently, better movers, they can actually play the game better and healthier. So it's, we try to, I talk a lot about the content of the movement and the context, right? And where our roles as fitness coaches, S&C coaches, whatever, where they exist. Are they just in the content as it has been traditionally? Or do we have to understand? We definitely have to understand the context, but do we have any effect in the context as well? And I think we do. We need to ensure that the two are married. But the content is that's what I'm talking about, is the quality of movement. So what are your KPIs that determine what quality movement is? As and my KPIs might be different than your KPIs, which may be different than Jonas's KPIs and someone else's. But have a list. Yeah. Understand what quality movement is so that you can start communicating it to the players that you're working with.
Yeah, no, brilliant. I want to be respectful of your time, Stu, but just jumping on that point just very quickly, like I was smiling when you said it because I've said this numerous times on the podcast that the old sort of phrase from technical coaches is all players don't move well. And we never really know what that means, like, because in their head, it can mean something completely different to what we understand. But you just discussing that then, I think just opens up the fact that we do sort of know. And if we have our KPIs, and it might, like you say, it might be different coach to coach, we revert back to that, don't we? And then we work on the things that we know we can impact. And it all ties in quite nicely with the podcast. But I just thought I'd bring that up because it's something we've spoke about a lot, the moving well. But like you say, what is well, like the players, all players move differently, don't they? They're all different shapes and sizes and have different skill sets and all the rest of it. And it's just if we dive, like you say, we could probably do numerous podcasts looking into that in terms of what is moving well and what is not. But yeah, no, I just thought it was an interesting way to sort of wrap things up.
Yeah, it's I mean, but yes, every player is individual, but there are some commonalities that exist within how what good movement is, you know, what efficient and effective movement is. And there's those what I call the rules, right? The rules of good sprinting or the rules of movement or whatever. And those are the commonalities. Those are the stable points. Those are the invariants. And there's variations, individual variations through every player in every sport, but based upon a lot of different internal constraints that they may have, right? But we know that a neutral pelvis is pretty important. If a player has a really, anteriorly rotated pelvis and is backside with their cycle, we know they're going to have issues, almost all of them, right? Now, there'll be exceptions. There'll be exceptions to, some players will have an anterior rotated pelvis and never have an issue. That's fine. But most of them won't. That's we don't care about those people. Well, we do, but we don't list our rules around those people. Our rules are the commonalities, those invariant things, right? Torso position is important. If we have somebody who's upright sprinting but leaning way forward and everything goes backside, then we're not maximizing the way that they sprint. Ankle, flexed and stiff ankles are really important. For me, again, these are my list of my KPIs, right? These are my rules, and you may have a slightly different set. But my point is, have a list of KPIs that you use to determine what good movement is, and then be consistent with how you apply those over time with every player all the time, and demand attention and intention from everybody.
Brilliant. I'm just going to pick, we normally do some, I call them quick fire, they're never that quick fire, but a few quick fire questions on the end of the podcast. I'm just going to pick one of them. And then I've got a couple of light-hearted questions just to finish off with that a few people have sent in. And it's an interesting one. So who are some of the biggest influences on your career?
All the athletes I've worked with. No question. More than anything.
Yeah.
All of us are sort of, generally, even the stuff that I do now is influenced by the type of stuff that I was doing, the people I was with, and the work that I was doing when I first started, right? So we're kind of biased towards the stuff that we were doing when we started feeling like we were good at what we were doing, which is, the stuff that I was doing in the 90s. So all the people around at that time. So Dan Paff, big mentor of mine, obviously, and a big mentor of a lot of different coaches. He's a significant influence to what I do now. The coaches that I was working with at the time, Matt Jordan, Nick Ward, a few others, we're talking about the mid 90s in Calgary, very influential. But by far the most influence to what I do and how I do it are the thousands of athletes I've worked with over the 32, 33 years that I've been coaching. That's everything to me. I try to, I don't think enough coaches try to, they see their roles as being very directive, and it's my job is to coach you and to teach you. But if you're open, you can learn a heck of a lot more from them than they will ever learn from you. Honestly, that's still the case.
Brilliant. Right. These questions, you can take the professional hat off and put the fan hat on. So someone has sent in, Rooney was probably the greatest striker. Do you believe Mo Salah has the title now?
First of all, Rooney wasn't the greatest striker. There's no way he was. Yeah, Salah is an incredible striker. I would love to have Salah on my team. I tell you, he's that goal he scored in the weekend was incredible.
Oh.
So no, I reject the premise of that question. I would say Rooney is fourth in the list of Premier League strikers.
Oh, if you say fourth, who's 1, 2, and 3 then?
Well, Shearer, Henry, and Aguero.
Okay, I'll give you that.
Probably in that order.
I'll give you that.
Yeah.
Final one. What's with the Insta handle? Were you involved in a butcher's accident?
So my Instagram handle is Finger Mash. And some people know this already. I was a DJ for many years. I DJ'd for 25 years. And Finger Mash was my DJ name.
Oh, awesome.
Yeah.
That's a cool story. I wasn't expecting that. That's a really cool story.
There you go. So I was, there's a whole community of people in Canada that only know me by either Finger Mash or Mash. Most people just call me Mash.
Brilliant.
So they wouldn't know my first name if you asked them.
Amazing. Stu, this has been absolutely quality. I'm really thankful for you giving up the time and coming on. We've done over an hour there and I really appreciate you doing it. We could have gone into loads more and I really enjoyed it. Absolutely flew by. So thank you very much for coming on the podcast.
Thank you. That did fly by. I can't believe that's over an hour, but yeah, I appreciate your time and appreciate all you do. And you do a great job with podcasts and thanks for that.
Thank you, mate. And just a heads up, we haven't really touched on much of the ALTIS work that you guys do, but if anyone wants any information, is the website the best place to go? Social media, where would you send them?
Yeah, I think the website's the best place, altis.world. And, all the social media handles are at ALTIS, ALTIS, and altis.world on the website is all the info's there. If anyone's interested, or they can just reach out to me through all my DMs are open on all of my channels. So if you're any interested in anything or interested in anything that we've talked about today, reach out. Love to hear from you.
Perfect. Really appreciate it, mate. Thank you very much for coming on.
Thanks, Ben.